Greetings, Facebook Live. Welcome to WKYC's 3-Point Play. I'm Ben Axelrod. This is Matt Florjancic. A busy day in the NFL. We're going to stick with our three topics to the NFL. And our first topic of the day, the quarterback carousel. It continues to turn. Today it actually really picked up steam. The biggest name, Kirk Cousins, going to the Minnesota Vikings, as was expected, although it's the first fully guaranteed deal in NFL history.
Yeah, 3 years, $84 million.
Yeah.
For 4 wins over a 500 or better team in his career.
And I think that is especially interesting when you think about the precedent it could set moving forward. I mean, Kirk Cousins was kind of an unprecedented. Quarterbacks like Kirk Cousins don't usually hit the market. Sometimes they get traded and then signed to an extension like Alex Smith. But you don't typically see a quarterback as young as Kirk Cousins hit the market. I think the last one was Drew Brees when he went from San Diego to New Orleans, and even then he had an injury.
Yep, extenuating circumstances.
Yeah, so it's not a common situation. So we knew it was going to be kind of an overpriced contract, but the fact that it's fully guaranteed, I mean, if there's ever a quarterback and maybe even a big-name player at another position, this sets a very interesting precedent moving forward that could have long-term ramifications on the NFL and its salary structure.
It sets a bad precedent, in my opinion, going forward, because if Kirk Cousins, who we ad nauseum talked about being a middle-of-the-road quarterback, maybe a top 15 but not a top 10 quarterback, can demand a fully guaranteed contract worth $84 million for 3 years, what would a guy that has a Super Bowl on his resume be able to charge for his services? This is going to become a very slippery slope for the NFL in the very near future. If guys like Kirk Cousins can cash in on these deals, then you look at people who have won multiple Super Bowls or been to multiple Super Bowls potentially cashing in. Carson Wentz, in a couple of years when his rookie deal is up,
right?
Oh my goodness!
Or Deshaun Watson.
They're gonna now.
Jared Goff.
Watson and has 4 more years left. If his 5th-year option would get picked up, and I think it probably will. You know, Wentz and Goff both have 3 years left max on their rookie deals. When they come due for a new deal, I mean, they're going to set the record in the stratosphere. Every quarterback, I think, every major free agent quarterback over the last 3 to 4 years, when they have signed their newest extension, became the highest paid player in the NFL. Matt Stafford did it, then all of a sudden Derek Carr did it. Matt Ryan was in the discussion for a while. Now it's Kirk Cousins, a guy who is a 4th-round pick, has 4 quality wins in his career and 1 trip to the playoffs where he didn't even win the game.
Yeah.
Like, I mean, $84 million fully guaranteed. My goodness, this is going to change the way contracts are negotiated from here on out at the quarterback position especially.
Yeah, I mean, I think it speaks to that need for that position. I mean, clearly, I think what's interesting, too, about this is the second domino to fall today was the Minnesota Vikings quarterback last season, Case Keenum, agreeing to terms with the Denver Broncos. That's a very interesting decision by the Vikings in the sense that they must have viewed Kirk Cousins as that much of an upgrade over Case Keenum. I mean, Case Keenum went for a pretty penny to Denver as well, but I do think Minnesota, I mean, that's kind of the ideal spot, though, for a quarterback. I mean, they have arguably the best wide receiver tandem in the NFL with Stephon Diggs and Adam Thielen. They have a strong run game, a strong offensive line, a great defense, one of the best defenses in the NFL. And now they add clearly a quarterback who they view as a top-tier level quarterback, regardless of his production in Washington. They're taking, I think, a big risk in terms of this, but clearly they see themselves as just that quarterback away. I think they must have thought that was the one thing separating them from the Philadelphia Eagles, although they lost to Nick Foles in that NFC title game.
Handily, I might add.
Handily. They just must view him as that much of an upgrade. But you're right. I mean, I was thinking about, Kirk Cousins. These quarterbacks don't become available, but this isn't just a precedent for free agents. This is a precedent for the quarterback position in general.
Yeah, the expectation now is that every dime of your contract, at least for the first 3 years now, is going to be fully guaranteed. And that's going to tie up NFL teams' abilities to build around that quarterback. And you have to be very careful not to end up in salary cap hell with contracts that you give to these quarterbacks. The San Francisco 49ers experienced it when they gave Kaepernick his extension. The Baltimore Ravens are still dealing with it as of right now after the extension that they gave Joe Flacco a few years ago. The New England Patriots have been the one exception. They've been able to keep their franchise quarterback happy, keep him in the fold, and still build around him because Tom Brady was willing to not be the highest paid quarterback in the league. Yeah. And if anybody deserves it at this point, it would be a guy with 5 rings and 8 appearances on his record. So you can look at Kirk Cousins, and maybe I'm looking at it the wrong way by saying only the 4 wins over quality opponents. It's not all him.
Right.
Obviously, there's a lot of other things that have to go right for you to win games. But now, if he goes to Minnesota and struggles to win games and doesn't have them in a position similar to what they were last year, not only is he going to be in trouble, but Zimmer and Spielman are going to have a lot of questions to answer from the media. Zimmer being the coach and Spielman being really kind of the czar of everything up there. It's going to be interesting to see how it plays out. I give them credit for taking a risk, but I think we can both agree that if Teddy Bridgewater doesn't have the dreaded non-contact injury in practice 2 years ago, we're not having this discussion about Kirk Cousins going to Minnesota.
Yeah, and now you have Teddy Bridgewater agreeing to terms reportedly with the New York Giants, Sam Bradford agreeing to terms with the Arizona Cardinals. These dominoes are falling at the quarterback position, and transitioning this conversation now to the Cleveland Browns, I think it makes that move to trade for Tyrod Taylor look all the better. I mean, you could argue Tyrod Taylor was the second best available quarterback on this market behind Kirk Cousins. I know there's still that debate about was this number 65 pick too much for them to give up, but they targeted their guy. They went out and got their guy. And for a guy who I think, we've talked about it before, they think he's going to be that bridge quarterback. They targeted him, they got him, and they didn't have to deal with any of this mess today. Whereas you look at Tyrod Taylor's former team, the Buffalo Bills, now they're standing there. They're the only team without a quarterback now.
Funny that you should mention that because I've been reading a lot of national reports that say that the Bills are a top trade partner right now because they've got 12 and 22 now that they did some dealings with the Bengals. They could conceivably, according to value trackers, trade up to as high as number 4. And I thought to myself, oh, no. Yeah. I know who has number 4, and I don't want to go through this again. But they might be in the mix to move up and try to fill the quarterback need that way. But they're still going to have a lot of questions to answer because Peterman's either going to have to play as the initial bridge, or they're going to have to start a rookie and deal with it and say, hey, we've got this fantastic running game, we've got a good defense, maybe we won't, totally kill this kid's confidence if we throw him out there early. It's an interesting situation, but look, for the quarterback position, especially with regard to the Browns, for them to deal 65 to Buffalo, I'm not mad at it because they identified the guy that they wanted and they went and got him at an affordable price. They used an asset on a player, which if you've watched the draft for the last 5 or 6 years, the Browns have been anything but definitive in using assets to turn into players. In fact, they've been allergic to it in a lot of cases, having always traded down at least almost every year since 2009.
Yeah, and I think the number 65 pick would have been the Browns' 6th pick in the draft.
Right.
Some teams don't have their 6th pick until the 6th round. Some don't until the 7th. Some teams don't have 6 picks, period, going into the draft. It would have been their 6th pick with the first 5 coming in the 1st and 2nd rounds for a team that, again, doesn't really need to get any younger. Actually, probably couldn't afford to add that much youth to this roster. So
right. Not when you had the youngest roster in the NFL last year. The median age was well under 25, and they only had 4 veterans over the age of 30 to start the season. They didn't finish the season with all those guys either. So getting younger, it's not always going to get better when you get younger. And you know what? Tyrod Taylor has enough experience in this league to really help some of the younger guys on this offense, and they're going to need him to play a big leadership role for this team.
Yeah, and I think he's a guy who's equipped to do that. I actually spent part of my day today reading a profile on Tyrod Taylor by Mina Kimes on ESPN.com. It's from last November, but there's a lot of good stuff in there. I kind of did a write-up of that, tailing off of it. It's up on WKYC.com if you're interested in some more information on Tyrod Taylor. Let's shift this conversation. Looking at the comments here, and if you guys have any comments or questions, leave them for us on Facebook Live, and we'll get to them as quickly as possible. A couple of comments here. Jim Lowry saying, sign that tackle, and there was one more. Where was it? Donnie Meyer says, I hope the Browns sign that tackle from the New England Patriots. They're, of course, referring to Nate Solder. There was a report today from the Boston Globe that the Browns are pushing, making a big move for Nate Solder, who's a free agent coming out of New England this offseason. And the most interesting part about that has nothing to do with Nate. It's about the guy he'd be replacing in Joe Thomas, who has still yet to inform the Cleveland Browns of his plans for the future.
Yeah, you're not going to sign Nate Solder to a huge contract and then move him to right tackle.
Right.
In theory, you could.
Well, think about
what
they have invested in the offensive line between J.C. Treader, Joel Bitonio, and Kevin Zeitler. I mean, that's a lot to pay for a right tackle.
Until this start of this offseason, Zeitler was the highest paid guard in the NFL, and Bitonio wasn't too far behind.
Yeah.
J.C. Treader got a nice bump in salary when he left Green Bay to come here. Joe Thomas will be one of the higher paid tackles in the league if he chooses to come back.
The highest.
So if you look at the tea leaves, then, okay, well, if they sign Solder, they're either doing that as an insurance policy or they think they can switch him to right tackle. I listened to an interview that Ben Volen, who is on the Patriots beat, did with a local radio station here this afternoon, and he said, look, Solder's a good, solid NFL tackle. Speed rushers give him trouble, and he's not an all-time great. No. And he'll be replacing an all-time great if he does, in fact, come here to replace Joe Thomas, but he's still a very serviceable lineman. What it's going to cost to get that serviceable lineman is a lot more than it would have been a couple of years ago when they had the opportunity to keep Mitchell Schwartz.
Right. No, and you're right. He's a seventh-year pro. He's been in the league for 7 years, never made a Pro Bowl, but been a starter for 7 years on the New England Patriots.
Right.
And has anchored an offensive line that's won 2 Super Bowls in that span and been to 2 others. He is a upper-tier offensive tackle, but he's not Joe Thomas. He's not a first-ballot Canton guy. Who is?
There's not many. Joe Thomas doesn't grow on trees.
Right.
I mean, you can't just go out in the draft and say, oh, this guy's a for-sure Hall of Famer, this guy's a for-sure Hall of Famer. I can just move the pieces on the chessboard and get it. It's not that easy. Like, you got spoiled for 10.5 seasons with the guy that you had anchoring the left side of your offensive line. It's going to be a step down no matter who you put there. It depends on how far of a step you want to take. Solder is a solid left tackle. Is he a Joe Thomas? No, you're not going to find that guy, but you can find the next best thing, and that very well could be Nate Solder. We know from watching half the season last year that the heir apparent is not really on this roster.
Not Spencer Drango.
It's not full. You do not have a long-term solution currently of what you used to have with Joe Thomas and what you could have had Mitchell Schwartz been able to be retained a couple of years ago. But if you are able to get Nate, that would be a heck of an addition to an offensive line. It brings a lot of playoff experience, and it brings a guy who's used to protecting the blind side of a pretty damn good quarterback. So all those are good things.
And while we're on the topic of offensive tackles, just got a tweet or a Bleacher Report alert on my phone. Cleveland to sign ex-Broncos offensive tackle Donald Stevenson to a 1-year, $2.5 million deal. I would imagine that is more in a depth capacity.
Right.
And that's similar to a move they actually just made before we came on air, signing Chris Smith. He was a linebacker on the Cincinnati Bengals. He's expected to play defensive end for the Browns. They signed him to a 3-year deal. Just more quality depth. I think especially looking at Chris Smith, I mean, that was one thing that was very apparent when Emmanuel Ogbah went down last year was for as strong as that defensive line can look in its starting unit, there's not a lot of depth behind those guys. And that, that probably either means Nate Orchard or Carl Nassib are on their way out. But, I mean, neither of these moves, neither Chris Smith or Donald Stevenson are going to move the needle, but they are moves that add some quality depth that this team is lacking.
You absolutely need to make moves like this. Like, regardless of all the sexy moves that you could make, you need depth moves too. You need under-the-radar moves that are going to be designed to get your team better. And let's face it, the Browns' first team unit on either side of the ball wasn't very good last year. In fact, in a lot of ways, it was awful. And they need to improve everywhere. And signing guys like this make that possible. You know, Smith and Stevenson, they're not going to be household names. They're not going to be Pro Bowlers, but they're going to be guys that bring veteran leadership and, more importantly, veteran experience to a team that was sorely lacking over the last 3 years.
Yeah, I mean, that's even, you look at what would they do if Sean Coleman went down at right tackle. What, do they need somebody to come in and push Sean Coleman?
I think you just got somebody that can help push him.
Yeah, and that's looking at Donald Stevenson's profile here. He started 4 of the final 5 games last year after losing the starting right tackle spot and primary backup job. So, I mean, this isn't a guy, this is not in the same conversation as Nate Solder.
No.
This is a guy who this move has nothing to do with Joe Thomas. This is a move you would make whether or not you knew what he was doing.
Right, exactly. You want to have depth, and having those bookend tackles that you can rely on or help push the younger guys to get better, it's never a bad thing. Some of these guys really need that kick in the pants. Mm-hmm. They walked into starting jobs because the team was that awful, mm-hmm. and they committed to the youth movement without any veteran presence. Now they need that extra kick. They need that boost to continue to get better. If you know you're going to have your job, whether you're good or not, you're not going to try as hard.
Right.
But if you know that you have to work your tail off just to keep your spot, you're going to work a heck of a lot harder and you're going to get better.
Right.
In theory.
And Donald Stevenson, a former third-round pick of the Kansas City Chiefs, was not drafted by John Dorsey, but was there when he got there a year later. And during his time with the Chiefs, started in 21 games at both tackle and guard. So he can also add depth across the line, which again is something this team was lacking.
Something that John Greco filled for them multiple times over his career. They let him go in free agency a couple of years back, and they were always trying to find that next veteran swingman that could play tackle, guard, and potentially center as well. Stevenson doesn't have center on his resume, but still the ability to move to the interior, knowing the fact that Joel Bitonio has been besieged by injuries in his career. J.C. Treader's also been besieged by injuries in his career. That's a good pickup for the Browns. It'll be a good depth pick.
Looking at a couple more comments here. Ryan Ruth says, lock up Jordy Nelson, who was just released by the Green Bay Packers moments ago. I think the Browns are still in the wide receiver market. I don't know if Jordy Nelson is necessarily in the profile of guys they're looking at. The wide receiver market, though, is crazy.
It's huge right now.
Look at some of the contracts Paul Richardson just got, Marquise Lee, Allen Robinson, Sammy Watkins. Wide receivers are moving quickly, so it will be interesting to see what the Browns do as they continue to add depth at that position. Maybe another starter. Terrell Pryor's name's still out there as well. But we have some stories to catch up on now, so we're going to have to cut this thing short, I think.
Absolutely.
We'll be on WKYC.com updating you on the latest on the Browns throughout the night. We'll be back with you tomorrow, breaking down free agency official tomorrow, the new league year official starting at 4 p.m. Eastern. We'll be back here shortly after that, breaking down all the latest. But until then, he's Matt Florjancic. I'm Ben Axelrod. Thanks for watching WKYC's 3-Point Play.